Welcome to the Tech Unlock podcast, where we demystify emerging technologies and give you the keys to unlock your successful tech career. I'm your host, Grace McJones. Let's unlock the future together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Tech Unlock podcast. And I am excited for today's discussion. I have Liya Safina with me. She's a tech innovation strategy leader, global keynote speaker, emerging tech expert. And today we're just going to talk about the current state of emerging tech, what that looks like, what skills you need to pivot into this field, and also what to look out in terms of if you want to be kind of like in this new job fields of whatever is going on in tech, because there's a lot. So I'm excited. Welcome to the show, Liya. How are you?
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I think when you talk about me being a tech innovation leader, sometimes it can seem a little bit vague. So I want to clarify for anybody who's listening that I come from a UX UI background. I actually hands-on design the products, but also direct teams who are working on them, work with clients, contribute to the strategy of where the company is going to go with this product. So that all together comprises the product innovation tech field.
Awesome. Well, starting off, I want to hear what's your hot take, especially in tech right now.
Well, everybody's talking about X and Twitter and what Elon Musk is doing to the product. Without any personal opinions on his decision making, purely from the product standpoint, I think we're hearing a lot about the super app approach that he's trying to take with X. And I want to highlight that the super app concept really came from the Eastern market, not the Western market. And the way that they design their digital products, even the full UX of products for China, for Japan, for Thailand is completely different. So if you're interested in what their super apps look like, look at Grab, look at Gojek, look at, of course, all of the most important big apps in China where people just do everything in one, and realize that I don't think that's really feasible for America. We have a completely different way that we do things, and it's not one size fits all. So I hope he has a plan of how he's planning to introduce an Eastern UX to the Western market, but I'll definitely be watching.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take. I feel like a lot of people just bash everything he's saying, but I think that's a good perspective in terms of what he's trying to accomplish has been done, but not in the landscape of where we live right now, especially in the United States and in the Western world. So jumping right into it, there's been a lot of emerging tech, and not even just emerging tech, but tech that has been around, whether that's AR, VR, whether that's the metaverse, Web3, crypto, all that stuff, and a lot has changed from 2020 till now 2023. So let's jump into it. What happened to those things that were so high, in terms of like people being excited, the media talking about it, folks, spending a lot of money into it. I saw recently that, Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse lost about $21 billion over the last, 18 months, which is not surprising, but it's definitely one of those things that is disappointing to hear because they literally rebranded their whole company from Facebook to Meta because their primary focus, based on what he said, was being metaverse first and not Facebook first. What do you think about all of that in terms of just how things have shifted recently?
Yeah, so if we zoom out for a second, what is interesting is that we've been on tech hype cycles that are of a duration of a year for a while now. I think ever since the first iPhone was released, maybe a little bit longer. If you remember the big hype around everybody creating an app, when everybody had a website, but now suddenly everybody has an app. I think that lasted a couple of years. Now these cycles get shorter and shorter. During the pandemic, we were on TikTok hype cycle and live shopping video and all of that. That lasted for approximately a year. Then we've gone on to, of course, the Web3 blockchain metaverse hype cycle. Now we're in the AI cycle. And this is kind of the new nature of the market. And I would encourage everybody to take a look at it with a kind of sober, realistic point of view and separate just the marketing noise from the actual underlying utility of the technology. So The metaverse was just an umbrella concept on top of the AR VR technology and the infrastructure that was provided for it. So VR is not going anywhere, right? The metaverse as a concept that was so heavily pushed by Mark Zuckerberg, as you're saying, was something that was created quite artificially. And don't get me wrong, in the gaming world, it's very fair to believe in all the different ways that it still manifests. But as a concept that's applicable to our daily life, that was artificially pushed, right? So it's not a surprise to see all of these valuations go down, all of these people unfortunately getting fired. But this is where I'm saying let's separate the technology and the utility from the marketing aspect of it. And I would say that the VR and the AR world is very much alive, and there's so much going on. So my partner also works in tech. He is an engineer and developer for AR VR technology. So I'm observing a lot of tools that are being developed very much firsthand. So he just completed an app for surgeons who, while performing the surgery, would wear HoloLenses. So will the nurses. And the infrastructure there allows them to speed up the process of how do they lay out the tools for surgery? What are the different phases of the surgery? How can the nurse serve the needs of the surgeon in the moment way better? And that is all amplified by augmented reality, what HoloLens provides, right? This is an extremely utilitarian approach. There are several hospitals in America that are already piloting it. There are a lot of hospitals in East and in Europe who are really interested in that. And the surgical metaverse, I kind of don't even want to use the word anymore, but that is alive and well. VR is also very much actively used in military trainings and pilot trainings and natural disasters where unfortunately are seeing quite a lot of fires. How else would the firefighters, be able to predict what they're going to do in an unknown situation, like with simulations around them, but with VR, right? So there's a utility, especially educational utility, especially in high stakes situation. That market is just going to grow. When we talk about AR, of course, we are all familiar with the filters on Instagram, etc. That is a market that is just in the beginning of actually seeing the real utility. We have seen some companies like Wanna, who's partnering with Farfetch right now to create virtual fitting for different products such as sneakers, etc. This is, again, just the beginning of it all. The biggest question is what value can we bring to people by overlaying additional information on top of the real world around you? And when we frame the question like that, we suddenly see a vast world of utility. So I would say keep an eye out on AR specifically, especially with Apple's newest release of their glasses. And we are hearing the rumors that they're going to be more utilitarian glasses, more lightweight, kind of inspired by Google Glass. So this is just the beginning. And then to address the Web3 aspect, it kind of really breaks my heart because I am a big fan of blockchain. I'm a big believer in blockchain. And it is very unfortunate. It's kind of like a little bit of a black swan event where we could not predict that so many people would jump on the hype train and just take advantage of people's excitement around it and start pushing NFTs that have absolutely zero value, right? And, the crash of FTX was the last drop in the bucket. I barely can talk about Web3 right now with people, listening to me. Like I almost can't. I have to wait for the dust to settle a little bit and new actual utilitarian technology to come to fruition. But on the other hand, I am personally a member of several DAOs, decentralized organizations. I own tokens that make me a landowner in Wyoming. So one of my NFTs made me a landowner. That's insane. Wow. And I still have it. If you've ever heard of the company called Vacation that creates sunscreen, like very, very loved by celebrities right now, their founder, Marty, is actually now in negotiations to buy a mansion in Europe. And as holders of NFTs, we will be co-owners of that mansion together with him. So there's a lot of stuff that is still happening. And there's a lot of actual value in splitting the shares with people and putting real estate on chain and putting a lot of different types of ownership on chain and um, in kind of dividing the responsibility, but the damage has been done. We have to
Yeah.
wait a little bit. And now we have to talk about AI.
Yeah, I agree. I love your analysis and breakdown of just reviewing the recent a lot of like tech hype cycle and kind of how it has really shifted within the last probably 12 to 24 months. You're right, the value is still there for some subset of industries in terms of like that's the military, that's the medical field, education. There's a lot of value still added in there. I think a lot of people look only at the lens of mass adoption, right? In terms of like, okay, if everyone doesn't have kind of like access to it, then it's like, what's the point? And I think that's definitely a valid question. And seeing that, the price points for, this VR sets are not that accessible. I'm excited for the Apple Vision Pro, but at what is it, $3,500?
No,
Come
no way.
on, bro. No. I feel like it's just kind of a tech toy for tech enthusiasts, Like, it's just kind of like, okay, this is cool. Yes, there'll be more. Obviously, I think this is V1. And there would be, different versions of the Apple Vision Pro. I think that'd be cool. The Meta Quest Pro is at almost $1,000, and so looking at it from just a price point perspective, I'm like, yes, this is great, but we are not ready for mass adoption, and that's fine. But it doesn't mean it doesn't have solid utility. Something that you said also in terms of looking at Web3, and like you, still a fan. I think being in the beer market, a lot of people who are really focused on building long term are still here building. They're not really discouraged by what the media is saying, what people are saying. But I think it's great that the hype cycle has died down, because then all the fraudsters and people who are in it for the money and whatnot have hopefully disappeared and won't return. But I feel like those who are building real utility are still here and going to keep building. But pivoting into basically, if people want to differentiate, okay, what is cycle versus what is hyper growth potential? What are some key indicators that you look for? Because in tech, I believe we have something called shiny object syndrome, which people talk about a lot, where it's like, oh, this is a new thing. Let me go after it. Oh, this is a new thing. Let me go after it. And from a career perspective, it's not always the smartest thing to do. For some people, sure, it might work out, but for most people, it doesn't, because it's a huge gamble and a huge bet, especially if it's still emerging. So, what is your perspective of kind of like figuring out, okay, is this just hype or is this the real thing that has potential?
That's a really good question, and it's a very tough question because there's no one right answer. I can only hypothesize from my experience. I would say the number one easiest question you could ask yourself to try to determine it is, which real world problem might this technology solve, right? And how? We used to be able to say, like, oh, Microsoft or Apple invested X million dollars in this technology. It must have been legit. Not anymore, right? We know that they have innovation labs. We know that they're also trying and experimenting, and it doesn't matter how much they invest. With the case with Meta, it might not be really the indicator. So I would really look at real world problems that it's solving. So we know that with blockchain, one of the things that we can say is verification of identity, verification of ownership. This problem is not going to go anywhere. One of my biggest personal regrets in my career is not being able to take the project that's called WorldCoin. It was announced a couple of years ago, but I think there's more. They finally made a couple new pushes recently. It is a project by Sam Altman, who is the creator of OpenAI, but it is a project in the field of blockchain. When I first was talking about designing for that project, I was talking to an agency about being, designing their website, creating their design systems, and just unfortunately I had the scheduling conflict. The initial idea behind WorldCoin was making sure that anybody can receive money to just be alive, and not to have to pay to be alive, right? That's the concept behind the universal basic income. And they were thinking about cryptocurrencies as a way to distribute it. But then they had all these questions arise. How do you confirm that one person didn't take their share twice? And that's where blockchain came in for verifying your humanity, verifying your identity. And I think it's a fascinating project. You can go on their website and read a little bit more about it. So that's a real world problem that the technology is solving. So the way that I phrase it with AR, exactly which problem can we solve, or whose life we can make easier by overlaying additional information on top of what you're seeing around you, right? With VR, it's a little bit tougher, but as I mentioned, another question that we can ask: how can we? What high stakes situation require training in full immersion, right? That's the VR question. So I think you can keep dissecting technologies that you're really interested in that manner by asking these critical questions. If the answer is yes, try to specifically look for those companies that work in that utilitarian field, because that is not something that's going to die down with the hype cycle.
Asking the right questions is the first step. A lot of people just don't do their due diligence to do research. It's kind of like, okay, to your point, these big companies are invested in it, so it must be legit. This VC firm is invested in it, so it must be something. And I think that's the biggest awareness I've seen with Web3 and with crypto is just kind of like, okay, just because, this celebrity or this person is endorsing something doesn't really make it legit. It means yes, it might be cool, it might be hype, but at the end of the day, if you're able to do your due diligence to do the research, ask the right questions, then you find yourself in a better space. And so what you talked about with WorldCoin is so interesting because I have thoughts about that. Looking at, the media and kind of how things came across, and also I think looking at how they went to Africa to kind of like test it out. And people are like, okay, yes, there's definitely populations which are going to be more acceptable to this for right now because they're desperate. They need the economy. So let's talk about ethics real quick when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
emerging tech, because I do feel like it is a word that is thrown around a lot. And we hear it when it comes to AI because everyone's like, oh, yes, we have to have the right, regulations and XYZ. But for someone who is, a tech innovation leader, how do you think leadership and people who work in tech should look at the ethics of building emerging tech? Because first of all, it's still evolving in a sense, right? And so there's not a lot of data points to work up from. So how do you define what ethics look like in terms of when we work on this product? And is there concerns that you have about things that are in the works right now, like WorldCoin or even generative AI, and things like that?
I think it's twofold. So one is fairly universal. Whatever you're working on, be aware of the context. Do not come to a community of people who are completely different from you and try to just push your ways of doing things on them, right? I think I'm very aware of that. I'm an immigrant from Europe. You probably are hearing some accent. Russian is my first language. I currently live in Hawaii, which is, you cannot be further from Belarus, where I'm originally from, than this. And there's a lot of sensitivity in Hawaii related to, of course, the Hawaiian land being stolen from the native Hawaiians, forcefully made the 50th state in America, and being a part of America. There's a lot of sensitivity around here. There's a lot of sensitivity around language. Which terms do you use? How you do business? How you innovate? So I had to learn, just by asking and by talking to people and by being ready to listen. And I think that applies to absolutely everyone in any given moment. So that's an easy answer. We all know that. I'm not going to say anything new. But there's a second part, which you touched a little bit on with the AI aspect, is new technologies create new problems. We did not have to worry about a digital privacies until we started having internet and iPhones and so many accounts across everywhere, and just accepting terms and conditions without reading them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that problem just did not exist. And it was created with innovation, right? So AI will create new problems. And I am actually a big fan of, and I would encourage everybody to follow and listen to Tristan Harris, who is a specialist in the Center for Humane Technology. You might have heard the biggest project was the documentary Social Dilemma on Netflix. They also released an amazing new talk on YouTube called The AI Dilemma,
Mm.
where they're talking about all of these unclear things around building with AI, and they've been testifying in Congress along with the founder of OpenAI in an attempt to pause some of the release of AI technology into hands of everyone. Because what you do in the lab is very controlled. You're a scientist, you're experimenting, you know how to do these experiments. But once something is released to the masses, that when the genie is out of the bottle, right? So to give you a very specific example, imagine you are working with AI that is a self-driving car, and you're trying to get it from point A to point B. And you put all these different guidelines in place from the historical guidelines that we're aware of. You know, do not hit people, do not hit animals. You're trying to make sure that you put the right guardrails for it to go where you want it to go. And then suddenly it goes backwards because you never told it to not go backwards. And it
Mm.
calculated that getting from A to B is way easier in reverse and faster. So this is why I support pausing the release of new AI technologies, because we just don't know the things that we don't know. We don't know which guardrails we should put in place. And these should be revealed slowly. A lot of people should be working on it, critically looking at things, testing them in controlled conditions. So that's why it's fairly complex.
You bring up a lot of interesting points because I know a few folks had signed. I'm not sure that's the same letter of with Elon Musk and a bunch of people saying like, "Hey, let's pause this out." And people like, "Do we trying to pause it so you can catch up with what's happening?" Because everyone has an AI solution now in terms of like most big tech companies. It's like if you're not adding it into your software, your services, you're kind of left behind. But I think that is a fair point to say, hey, things can get out of hand quickly, and we don't really have the best mitigation like plan to solve for everyone in every scenario, right? And I think people are like, okay, shouldn't that be something people thought about before releasing this type of technology into everyone's hand? And when we talk about the rate of growth for users, I know with OpenAI, I believe it was 100 million in um, I need to double check this, either in 5 days or in a week or something like that, which is the fastest. I know people are trying to say Threads was the fastest, but that doesn't count because people already had
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
existing
yeah.
accounts with Instagram. But you see the growth at which, and I think it's already in some instance mass adoption rate because everyone and their mom is using ChatGPT at this point. And a lot of people are not really too focused on like, okay, what is the drawback, because it solved a lot of problems instantly, right? People are like, oh, I can use this for my business, I can use this to plan vacation, I can use this to do XYZ. And so from the consumer perspective, how are we supposed to look at this technology, right? It's like, okay, what should I be doing in terms of keeping my data safe, maybe, or maybe should I wait out instead of trying to like build my whole company or business on these tools when all the information isn't flushed out? For example, for people who are like writing books using AI, it's like, okay, will you be sued in the future for using AI generated stuff that's been trained on other people's books or data? So, what advice would you give in terms of just people listening in general of how to kind of evaluate, emerging tech and how to go about it in an ethical way?
I can give a perspective. So, one thing that I would say is at the moment, I would assume that anything you create with the help of AI, you cannot claim full ownership of.
Yeah.
And just know that, right? Of course, there are like every day, every week, there's new laws being pushed out. There's new, just kind of like different contexts for things. But as of now, I would say if you're used AI for it, it's not fully yours. Second, if you're engaged in a creative work, never start with ChatGPT. Never start with, you know, um, just something that purely comes from AI, because as you mentioned, it's always a remix of what's out there. You cannot create anything new if you start with a remix.
Mm-hmm.
So always start with your own thought process and only use it to push it further, to kind of like fill in those more mechanical gaps. Um, that would be the two things. And then a lot of people with ChatGPT, they create a dummy account on Google Gmail and only use that so that it doesn't really connect it to their identity fully. For business, I don't think there's a very specific solution. There are different products that are built on top of OpenAI's API that have very specific terms and conditions written out, and you know how you're going to leverage it for business. But when we're specifically talking about free tools, it's a wild west out there for now, and I don't have a very specific answer. Just like things to be cautious of, things to keep in mind, and kind of err on the side of like, let's be a little bit more anonymous here. Let's be a little bit more on the more safer side.
Pivoting into your career in terms of being exposed to a lot of interesting projects and clients. I know you've worked with Google, Nike, a bunch of cool companies and individuals, as for all, and so many things. How have you navigated your career in terms of like knowing what projects or clients to work with, especially when it's always in a space that's always new and changing and kind of like evolving over time?
Yeah, so a lot of these things came with experience. When I just started out in the field of UX UI, I was, just a designer, right? I was as a part of the agency. We did not do a lot of innovative stuff, but I always wanted to do a lot of innovative stuff. I remember my first boss said, "Leah, just stop innovating, follow best practices."
Mm.
That was kind of a thing I was known for. I always wanted to reinvent best practices, so that's how I knew I wanted to work in innovation. Um, but I think there were a few things that drove me to the path that I'm in right now. First of all, I was always very proactive. So, working at a digital design agency, I always was in touch with the new business team. And I always was extremely curious about the clients they're talking to. So I remember there was one client, they were rethinking death. And I was, oh my God, I want to work on that no matter what. Please put me on that project. And the second thing that I made sure I did is the breadth of experience. So right now I can say I worked with everything from fashion to baby food to dating apps to B2B platforms to ticket booking to credit cards to, you name it. Restaurants, right? So for me, it was really important to gain a full understanding of how digital flexes across different fields and industries. But apart from that, it's also different technologies. So I design responsive websites, I design apps. Getting into AR, getting into even just like watch, designing for the watch interfaces, that was really hard. And very often what I did is on top of the work that was paid for, I would throw in free concepts for newer technologies. Just because I wanted to create something I saw, I had a vision for the client. They might have never used it, but they got it, right? So I started building my portfolio by, on top of paid works, creating speculative work for existing clients in the hopes of selling something for them. Whenever I started playing with Spark AR and creating AR filters, I always did them for existing businesses, and I would just send them. It's like, hey, is that something you would like to do, right? So I always kind of had that idea that I would love to make it my work that I'm paid for.
Mm.
And then the more experience I got, I think that is universal across any industry. The more you do, the more you're known for that. The longer I was in digital design industry, I think after approximately 3 to 4 year mark, I started being known as a person who's interested in these things, and I kept being really proactive. I kept, suggesting it. And then somehow agencies started finding me and started offering that type of work. And very inexplicably, for probably 4 years, I just had this work come to me. Wow. And then last 2 years, when we were on the blockchain hype train, I put all of my work on pause, and I stopped taking any non-blockchain projects. And I had a dip in my income. I did not make as much money during that year, but I did it very deliberately because I only wanted to grow my portfolio working with blockchain. And I did it. I worked on 5 different projects. That was fantastic. And then FTX happened, and I was like, okay, I guess I'm back to designing this. Which I never regret, honestly. I still am the type of person, I love versatility. I love working. I think that the innovation is coming from cross pollination, and having an expertise across all these verticals really helps me innovate.
Love, wow. I don't even know where to start. I love that story. And thank you so much for being transparent and vulnerable to say, like, yeah, like, I only took the specific projects and now, that wasn't maybe the best thing, even though it was exciting to work on. And knowing that it takes time, especially if you're in a non conventional path within tech, because being a creative freelancer and a leader within innovation, it's not something that you're taught in school, right? Of like, oh, here's how do this. If you do end up going to school, it's more about finding the things that you're good at, like you said, cross pollinating, working with what you have, your innate skills, building that portfolio, and then finding those clients. And so if someone's listening right now and they're like, okay, this seems really cool, like I don't think I've ever heard about this kind of like career path. What is an advice you would give them in terms of getting started to, first of all, build a portfolio that can attract certain clients, right? So is it more about honing in on creative skills, interpersonal skills, networking? If you had to do it all over again in 2023, how would you do it?
that's that's a tough question because 2023 is a very different market that 10 years ago, right? It's very
Yes.
saturated. I would say, of course, creative. That's a no-brainer. You have to be good at what you do. So take any chance you can to create speculative work, to create pro bono work for your clients that already pay for something else, to like find any chance to do it, boot camps, whatever you can. I want to also make a note that now we're seeing the rise of AI tools for design, such as Relume, where it kind of designs for you. It creates sitemaps for you, wireframes for you. You can plug it into Figma. You can connect your Figma to Webflow and export it, and you basically did not touch the website almost. And I would discourage from people from building their whole career around that because you
Mm.
still need those skills of being able to do it yourself. Only use AI design tools as a supplement. It might be very easy in the beginning. You're like, oh no, I'll just have it design everything for me. You will suffer consequences later on. You have to be able to do it yourself. So make sure that you really work on your craft is number one. Number two, TikTok is still really, really great. They haven't changed the algorithm yet, and being able to go there and talk about what you love. I have a friend from the Web3 world. She fully built her own consulting practice just from documenting her journey of getting familiar with Web3 on TikTok.
Mm.
Fantastic. Um, Go to different events, online and offline, speak about what you like. I recently was at a conference. There was a speaker on AI, and he decided to engage the audience. So he asked the audience, how do you use AI tools? I stood up and I say, look, last month I did this pilot experiment myself. I used 3 AI calendar integrations that fully managed my life. It was hell. It was really hard. Things were moving around without you knowing it on your calendar. I talked about that. I talked about comparing 3 tools. I had 5 companies come up to me after that, and I was just a person in the audience answering the question who wanted to hire me to consult their company on integrating AI.
I love
So
that.
so just proactivity, being passionate, but being genuine and being humble, where in a way we're saying like I could be wrong, the technology can flop. I look at pluses and minuses of technology, and the my safety anchor is looking at the utility always, like how applicable can it be to people's life, and looking at underlying technology. Do not look at the marketing side because that's the shiny object syndrome. That's the apple that's going to drive us away from you.
Oh man, that is so good. I feel like there are a lot of things that folks can do because I a lot of people are just kind of like consuming, right? Like consuming the tutorials and the YouTube. I mean, obviously consume this podcast too. So thanks for listening. But at some point, you do have to what you said earlier, which I think is so key, especially working in tech. You have to be proactive and you have to be curious and you have to do the work. And you can't be afraid of not failing or trying new things or putting yourself out there. And to your point, just being in the environment or the audience of where innovation is being talked about or where people are sharing ideas can be life changing. And so if you are someone who's like, okay, I like working in corporate, but I still feel like I want to have, a creative aspect in terms of like building things that are feel, authentic and have some type of, real world utilization. Being able to have that portfolio, like you said, of being able to be present in these conferences, whether it's online and offline, is so key. Because how else will people know what you do if you don't talk about it, or if you don't share your work publicly, or like people like to say to build in public. So thank you so much for sharing all those tips, because I feel like that's very, very applicable right now. There is a lot of cool things I know that you're working on, but if people want to continue learning from you and your expertise and consult with you, what is the best way to do that?
I'm so glad you asked. So, first of all, I have an innovation newsletter. I am not one of the people who writes it religiously every week or every month. I write it when I have time, but it's very non-commercial. It's just me sharing my opinions, predictions, trends, my experiences. It's called The Goods. Instead of two O's, you have three zeros. It's on Substack, and we'll drop the link in the show notes, hopefully. I'm also going to leave the link to my link tree, where recently people have been asking me to just book a couple of hours with me to consult on their career path or how to introduce AI in their business. So I just integrated Calendly, and you can just go into Calendly, find the time that works for you, and book some time with me, which is fantastic. I love meeting people. It's still very fresh in my memory what it feels like to be new in this field. I actually used to be an architect before I switched to digital design. I know what it feels like to apply for jobs for months and not hear back. How frustrating it is, how completely it's just devastating. You don't know what else to try. So I remember that, and I will always remember that. And I'm here to give career advice to people who are just starting out.
Oh, you're the best. I love when people are open to helping others, because it's hard. You have your life to live, you have your own priorities, but as people who are uh, going through just a lot of transitions, whether that's, with tech layoffs or the economy, it's always great when you can talk to someone to get a better overview, or to just help you zoom out and see the bigger landscape of what you're trying to achieve. And so, like Liya said, if you want to book a consultation, I know her schedule is usually pretty booked, but definitely check out the show notes. And we're going to share more of all the information that you shared in today's episode. But thank you so much for sharing your expertise and just taking a look on the landscape of emerging tech and how to evaluate them, especially from a consumer or builder, an innovator perspective. And I know a lot of people have learned a lot from also you sharing your career journey. So thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was fantastic. I really loved all your takes and perspectives, especially on WorldCoin. I was actually not yet familiar with their pilot implementation test in Africa, so I definitely would love to take a look and see what's happening there.
Yeah, I think, a lot of things that are happening right now has a different way of impacting different communities. And so I think when it comes to, like we mentioned earlier, about ethics and the way things are worked and planned, I think everyone has their own due diligence to be like, okay, this is great, but how is this being tested? Where has it been tested and why? Because the laws in Africa sometimes do not protect its people, so it's easy to exploit. And so I hope with WorldCoin that people are able to take a closer look and say, okay, this idea is valid. There are a lot of good things that can come out of it, but at the end of the day, we have to make sure that it's being dispensed in a way that's equitable and ethical for everyone that's involved in it. But I think it's a very interesting project, and I can't wait to see what comes out of it. So thanks again for being on the show, and I will catch you on the next episode of the Tech Podcast.